In a world ruled by mighty kings and ancient gods, where power was measured by wealth and armies, there lived a boy named Bakari, a simple servant's son caught in the shadows of one of history's greatest moments. This is his story. A story of fear and wonder, of loss and hope, of a land that bled and a people who dared to walk free. Listen closely, because sometimes the voices forgotten by history carry the deepest truths. And sometimes the smallest among us see what empires cannot. This is the testimony of Bakari, a witness to the plagues of Egypt and to the freedom they forced upon a nation. Let's begin.
I have lived far too many years to count. So many years, in fact, that now there are days when I forget small things, the names of neighbors I have greeted for decades, the reason I walked into a room, the errands I was meant to run. My bones are slow, and my mind often drifts like a boat without oars. Time has worn me thin, but not everything fades. Some things, some moments, time cannot touch. Not even death, I think, will be able to steal them from me. There are days that settle into a man's memory like fire pressed into soft clay, burned deep, unmoving, permanent. Days that do not age with the body. Days that remain as vivid as the moment they were lived. And no matter how far I travel from my youth, they wait for me, and Israel walked free. This is one of them. The days when Egypt bled, when Egypt bowed, no more than 8, perhaps 9. The days when we thought we understood the world, and the world taught us how small we really were. I was only a boy then, born to a poor family, servants by necessity, though not by chains, not close enough to taste its gold, nor to smell the perfumes carried in and out by the wives of nobles, but close enough to feel its weight. We lived beneath the shadow of Pharaoh's palace, close enough to understand what power looked like, not as something we could ever hold, but as something we must bow to, always. We were not slaves like the Hebrews, but we were not nobles like the priests either. We belonged to that great, silent multitude, the in-between people, a sorrow she never named, but which seemed to hang from her shoulders heavier than any sack of grain, too low to be seen, too necessary to be ignored, forgettable, replaceable, cogs in a machine too ancient and too vast to even notice us spinning. My father swept the courtyards of the merchants, day after day, his back bent beneath the sun, brooms scratching over stone like a prayer whispered through cracked lips. My mother ground grain, always silent, always moving. Her hands were stained white with flour and sorrow. We served, we survived, we kept our heads down, as the small people of Egypt had always been taught to do. Because when you are small, you learn it is safer not to look too high, not to dream too loudly, not to question the world carved in stone above you. But even we, even the forgettable ones, we could feel it. There was something in the air, something moving beneath the surface of life, like a storm on the horizon that no one dared name aloud, like the breath of something ancient and unseen, something that had begun to stir in the dark corners of Egypt. Something was coming, something we did not understand, something terrible, something holy. I remember the way my mother paused at her grinding stones some days, her hands still, her head tilted, as if listening for a sound only she could hear. I remember how my father grew quieter, how he would look towards the palace with a crease in his brow, as if he sensed cracks forming in walls no one else could see. I remember the servants whispering, always whispering, about signs and omens, about frogs where there should be none, about waters that did not run clean, about whispers carried on the wind from the land of Goshen. Even a boy could feel it. The gods of Egypt were growing restless. Or, perhaps, it was not our gods at all. Perhaps it was a god we did not know. A god older, wilder. A god who had finally come to answer prayers not our own. Even now, as my hands tremble with age, and my breath comes slower with each season, I remember the morning it began. I suppose the sun rising red was not strange to Egypt. Our skies often burned with crimson before settling into gold. But that day, especially that day, there was something in that color that felt like a warning. Like the sun itself was bleeding over the world. I was a boy, and boys are sent to fetch water. That was how mornings began. The great Nile, our river, our pride, the very veins of our nation, it gave us life. It fed our crops. It cradled our trade. It carried the whispers of our ancestors beneath its surface. It was as constant as breath, as faithful as the sunrise. But not that morning. I walked the narrow path barefoot, feeling the dust between my toes, a clay jar cradled against my hip. I remember how quiet it was, too quiet. Even the birds seemed uncertain, watching from their branches with heads tilted, as though they too sensed the world shifting beneath their wings. When I reached the water's edge, I saw it. And even now, after all these years, I can still taste the fear that rose in my throat. The river, our great, mighty Nile, had turned to blood, not simply red. The smell of slaughterhouses, of iron, of death lingering in the air. Blood, thick, heavy, dark as garnet beneath the rising sun. Fish floated upon its surface, bellies turned to the heavens, their bodies pale and stiff. The water that once sang to us with gentle ripples now moved sluggishly, like something wounded, something dying. I dropped my jar. It struck the rocks and shattered, a sound too small to matter in a world unraveling. Word spread faster than fire. Neighbors came running, then the merchants, then the priests wrapped in linen and fear. They stood by the banks, staring as though the river might suddenly return to itself if they looked long enough, hard enough. But the Nile did not turn back. It bled on. Fishermen wept openly. Their nets hung empty and useless. Their boats sat idle, rocking softly in the current that was no longer water. Mothers pulled their children back from the edges, as though the very air might poison them. Fathers exchanged glances filled with questions none dared speak aloud. And in the midst of it, Pharaoh's magicians. Ah yes, I remember them well, a tall men in fine robes. Faces painted in confidence, they no longer wore comfortably. They came with their staffs and their chants and their polished words. They waved their arms. They spilled clean water into bowls and turned it crimson with their tricks. They smiled as if to say, "See, this is nothing. We can do this too." But we knew, even as boys, even as servants and small people, we knew they were children playing with fire, pretenders grasping at shadows. Their magic was imitation, their power, a hollow thing compared to what had truly begun to move through our land. Because this river of blood, this was not their doing, nor was it Pharaoh's. Not even the gods of Egypt had stirred this wrath. No, this was something higher, something angrier, watching us, watching Egypt, with patience worn thin, something older than our temples, something unseen, but watching. My name is Bakari, by the way, and this is my memory, not written in stone, not carved upon monuments, but burned into the soft clay of a young boy's heart, never to be washed away. The river did not return to water, not for days, not for weeks. Surely Pharaoh would fix it, as he always had. Sour water, fear pressed into every stone and corner of our city. By then, Egypt had begun to smell like death, rotting fish. But we told ourselves, surely, this was the worst of it. Surely, the gods were angry, but they would be appeased. We were fools. We did not understand yet. The worst was still to come. First came the frogs. Thousands, no, millions. More than the eye could count, more than reason could comprehend. They poured from the Nile, from the canals, from the wells. They came in waves, relentless, endless, as though the earth itself had birthed them in fury. They leapt into homes, sleek bodies leaving wet trails across our floors. They crawled beneath blankets, into ovens still warm with bread. They hid in baskets of grain, nestled among cooking pots, stared from the corners of rooms with unblinking, alien eyes. At night, their shrill cries rose, like a curse over their rooftops, a chorus of madness, a song of judgment. I remember Mira, my little sister, screaming when one landed on her bare arm. She was just a child, smaller even than me. She cried until her throat was raw, until my mother gathered her trembling into her lap. But even my mother's arms could not shield her from the plague. I can still see my mother on her knees, her hands red from scrubbing stone that would not stay clean. She wept quietly, shoulders shaking, tears falling where frogs had fallen before. Her broom was useless. Her strength was fading. And my father, he sat in the corner some nights, staring at his hands as if he no longer recognized them, as if the hands that once fed his family now belonged to a stranger watching helplessly as his world unraveled. Then the gnats, clouds of them, swarming, suffocating. They did not respect thresholds. They came into our mouths when we spoke. They crawled beneath our fingernails, into the corners of our eyes. We scratched until we bled. Children screamed from the itching, the burning. Old men coughed them from their throats. And still, it grew worse. Then came the flies. Not the ordinary flies of waste and rot. These were plague incarnate. They covered our faces like veils of black. They filled the air until the sun itself seemed in beneath their wings. They bit. They stung. They crawled into nostrils, into ears, into water jars and bread baskets. They settled on wounds, on sores, on lips trying to form prayers. We ate with them on our food. We drank with them floating in our cups. We slept beneath blankets that moved with their crawling bodies. Sleep became a cruelty. Food became a torment. Breathing became a prayer. And each day brought something new, something worse. A fresh horror we could not have imagined the day before. By night, my mother whispered prayers into the darkness, not to the gods of Egypt, for what good had they done? No, she prayed now to any god who would listen, any god who could see us, any god who might spare her children, her crumbling home, her threadbare hope. Even I, young as I was, began to wonder if those gods existed at all, or if there was only one God that not ours, not Pharaoh's, but theirs, the God of the Hebrews, the God who had come for them and had come against us. But the river was only the beginning. The frogs, the gnats, the flies, they were only shadows of what was coming next. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that things could grow no worse, that we had reached the depth of suffering. But I was a boy. I did not yet understand how far a heart could fall, or how long judgment could stretch its hand over a nation. It came slowly at first, a sickness creeping through the fields like a shadow with no shape. Our livestock began to die, one by one, then by dozens, then by hundreds. Camels fell where they stood. Donkeys collapsed in their yokes, tongues swollen, eyes glassy with pain. Oxen, once strong and patient, lay silent beneath the sun, their bellies rising no more. Their bodies rotted in the open fields, bloating beneath the heat, and with them came the flies again, more than ever before, thick clouds of hunger feeding on flesh, laying eggs in decay, birthing more death upon death. The markets grew quiet, where once the streets rang with barter, with laughter, with the clatter of wheels and hooves. There was silence. The butchers closed their stalls, the bakers shuttered their ovens, mothers held their children tighter, fathers looked to the sky, searching for answers that would not come. Our neighbors vanished indoors. The air grew heavy with fear and with stench. Egypt began to rot from the fields inward. And then upon our very skin, judgment made its home. Boils, angry, festering, ugly wounds that burned with fever, that oozed with rot, that spread without mercy. We scratched ourselves raw until blood mixed with pus. Children cried. Through swollen lips, Mothers hid their faces behind cloth. Even the priests, those who spoke for our gods, covered themselves in shame, their robes torn, their voices silenced by the sores upon their flesh. Not even Pharaoh's magicians could stand upright beneath this plague, their proud faces twisted in agony, their bodies hunched in defeat. They could conjure no remedy. They could offer no explanation. Their magic had run dry, and still Pharaoh hardened his heart. I heard the whispers pass from servant to servant in dark corridors. This is not magic. This is judgment. But no one dared say it aloud where walls might listen. No one dared speak against Pharaoh. Not yet. And still, the sky had one more curse to hurl down upon us. One afternoon, the heavens broke open in a fury Egypt had never known. Hail, not like the pebbles we sometimes saw in storms, but stones. Stones like fists. Stones that shattered roofs, that broke bones, that crushed fruit upon the vine and tore trees from their roots. The vineyards were stripped bare in minutes, the barley fields flattened beneath ice and wind, and fire licked across the heavens, racing between clouds like serpents of flame. Thunder cracked the ground beneath us. Walls trembled, children screamed, old men fell to their knees in terror. I saw a man. I knew him, a merchant from 3 streets over, standing in the road, cursing the sky, shaking his fist. And then, in a flash of light, he fell, struck where he stood. His body smoked in the rain. His words burned silent forever. The gods of Egypt did not answer. The priests did not speak. They remained behind closed doors, licking their wounds, nursing their shame. But the Hebrews, they lived untouched. Their cattle lived. Their fields stood. Their homes did not shatter beneath hail. Their children did not wail beneath boils. Their land seemed wrapped in unseen protection while ours crumbled beneath invisible wrath. We saw it. We all saw it. But no one said it aloud. Not yet. Not where Pharaoh might hear. Not where ears might carry words to the wrong place. But inside, deep inside, we began to wonder, what kind of God protects slaves while kings are left to bleed? But the hail had not been the end. Not even close. There was still something more waiting for us. Something crawling. Something ravenous. The locusts. I remember the sky turning dark again. Not with clouds, but with wings. A plague of them. A storm made of bodies. Wings and legs and hunger. Endless hunger. They came with a sound, a terrible, churning noise like sand grating against itself. They did not fly past us. They settled. They landed like a curse laid across the earth. They covered the ground so thickly that the sand disappeared beneath them. Fields vanished beneath their bodies. Walls vanished. Trees vanished. The world vanished beneath them. And when they lifted, when at last they moved on, they left nothing behind. No wheat, no barley, no figs, no dates, no grapes clinging to their vines. What had been green was now gray. What had been alive was stripped bare. By then, hunger had begun to gnaw at our bellies. Children's ribs showed through skin. Mothers chewed on scraps of leather to quiet the ache inside. Men grew hollow-eyed, pacing rooms they could no longer provide for. Hope had drained from our eyes. Hope had no place left to stand. And then came the darkness. A darkness so thick it settled on the skin like oil. So complete it seemed to enter your mouth, choke your lungs, blind your heart. For 3 days it clung to us. We could not see each other. We did not speak. We did not move from where we sat. In our house, we sat alone, though we were together, each of us swallowed by our own fear. I could hear my mother's breath catch in the blackness. I could hear the tears she tried to stifle. I could hear my father muttering prayers to gods who no longer answered, gods whose names now felt like ashes in his mouth. I lay in my corner, arms around my knees, waiting for something, for anything, to break the silence. I thought perhaps the sun itself had died. Perhaps Egypt had been forgotten forever. We had never known such darkness, not outside, not inside. But even then, the worst had not yet come. There was still one plague left, one more wound to be carved into Egypt's heart. The night the firstborn died. I will never forget the scream that woke me, not one scream, but thousands, rising all at once, from streets and alleys, from palaces and prisons alike. A cry so fierce it seemed to tear the earth open. It was not just grief, it was terror, it was realization. It was the moment Egypt understood we had been undone, every house, every home, from Pharaoh's golden halls to the poorest hovels where children slept on dirt. The firstborn fell, the son of Pharaoh, the daughter of the baker, the child of the merchant who sold oil and figs in the square. None were spared, and in our small house, death found us too. Not me, not Mira, my little sister, but my father, the firstborn of his mother. He fell quietly in the night. No scream, no warning. One moment breathing, the next gone. I remember my mother cradling him as though he were a child, rocking him back and forth, her tears falling onto his lifeless brow. She wept not just for him. She wept for all of us, for what had been lost, for what could never be reclaimed. And me, I sat frozen in my corner, too numb to cry, too afraid to move, too broken to ask why. And then, before dawn, Pharaoh broke. I was too young then to understand the politics of kings, but I heard the whispers. I saw the hurried messengers running through the streets like rats fleeing a sinking ship. He summoned the man. They called Moses. He begged them to go, not with threats, not with bargains, but with desperation. Leave, go, take everything, take everyone, just go. And so they went. I watched from the shadows of a crumbling doorway as they walked past. Thousands of them, a river of people winding through streets once meant to crush them beneath their feet. Their faces were tired, their shoulders worn thin by years of chains and sorrow. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something shone. Not joy, not yet, but something deeper, something I had never seen before. Freedom. They carried no swords. They waved no banners. They walked as if they carried victory in their bare, calloused hands, as though they had already crossed some unseen finish line while the rest of us still wandered blind in circles. I remember a boy among them, younger than me, walking beside his mother, his small hand gripping the edge of her robe. For one moment, he looked back, not in fear, not in hatred, but in something like wonder, or pity, or perhaps gratitude for the chains he would never wear again. He looked free. He was free, and I felt something stir in me I did not understand. Envy, yes. Fear, perhaps. But somewhere beneath those things, hope. Hope that somewhere beyond this city, beyond this suffering, there was a God who heard the cries of the weak. Perhaps all three, perhaps more. Years passed. Egypt licked its wounds, buried its dead, rebuilt its walls. But the Hebrews never returned. Stories trickled back to us like wind through broken windows. They said they crossed the sea on dry ground. They said they were fed by bread from heaven. They said their God walked among them in fire and cloud. I do not know. I was not there. But this I know. This I will swear with my last breath. Their God is real, not because of what He gave them, but because of what He took from us. Not riches, not land, not monuments, but certainty, pride, the illusion that we, mighty Egypt, were untouchable. He shattered our gods. He broke our kings. He exposed our chains. And now I am old. So old my hands tremble, my sight fades, and sometimes I forget where I am. But this story, I remember. I carry it like a scar beneath my ribs. I tell it still, not because I hate Egypt, not because I curse my youth, but because I wonder, how many plagues must fall upon a man before he sees the chains he carries? How many times must a heart break before it finally bows? The Hebrews left, Egypt remained, but in my heart, I believe it was not they who were the slaves. It was us, slaves to pride, slaves to gods who could not save us, slaves to power we thought was eternal. And they, the ones we scorned, the ones we crushed beneath bricks and whips and cruelty, they found something we never could. They found freedom. If you have ears to hear, listen. If you have eyes to see, look. Even today, even now, there are chains men still carry without knowing. Ask yourself, what must break before you finally let them go? This is my testimony. I leave it with you today. God is real. God is here. And God will never leave us alone.
Bakari's story is not just a tale of ancient plagues or distant lands. It is a mirror held up to each of us. How many struggles must we face before we recognize the chains we carry? How many times must our hearts break before we allow ourselves to be truly free? If this story stirred something inside you, a question, a hope, a restless yearning, then you are not alone. Join this journey with us. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to walk with us through stories that open eyes and touch hearts. Because freedom often begins not with swords or armies, but with the courage to listen. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.